Section 28 was really never properly challenged in court in terms of a definitive judgment. But that doesn't mean to say that it wasn't effective, and it was very effective on lots of micro levels, I think. It worked on self-censorship and lack of clarity of understanding of exactly what this would look like as a piece of legislation in practice. And we know that that rippled out in terms of it being misrepresented and used in all sorts of ways that now seem quite ridiculous, and particularly in schools, of course. I was in Manchester, which is where I'm from originally. I was there on the Manchester March when tens of thousands hit the streets. I was there on the London March when tens of thousands hit the street. And, you have this galvanisation of activists coming together, but also when people show their support, that really meant a lot. The year after Section 28, I moved to Glasgow to study at Glasgow School of Art, and I graduated in 1993. I did my dissertation at art school. You had to do a written dissertation as well as practical work, and I did my dissertation on Section 28. And I was aware of exhibitions getting censored or, all different bits of funding being pulled from initiatives and so on. So I've always been, interested in what the practicalities of Section 28 looked like at local authority level and how that was being misused in a way. So in the 1980s, I suppose the context was provided by the backdrop of the Thatcher government really being committed to a return to Victorian values, that of the nuclear family and so on. Some of the context came from the AIDS and HIV crisis and lots of kind of media hysteria around that, and particularly anti-gay men. And I think the most important bit of the context that Section 28 was enacted in came from a real backlash against local authorities doing pro-equalities work. Another example of how Section 28 was kind of snuck in, under the radar. This was the ways that the local authorities tried to use it. In 1995, we set up at the Women's Library a chapter of the Lesbian Avengers. The Lesbian Avengers were a direct action group that came out of New York, and chapters were set up all over the country. And we set up one here in Glasgow. We found out that the Mitchell Library, our beautiful central library here in Glasgow, was almost like censoring the Pink Paper, our weekly gay, lesbian, bisexual newspaper. And unlike all the other publications they had on free display, you could go in, you could put your hands on any newspaper, or they subscribed to lots of magazines, and all those were free, you could go and get them. But they decided to put the Pink Paper under the counter. So you had to, one, know it was there, and two, go in and say, I'd like to see the Pink Paper, please, and they would get it out from under the counter. So it's clearly discriminatory, and clearly as a result of Section 28. So the Lesbian Avengers went and we picketed the Mitchell Library. So we went every day, we collected petitions, we did direct actions in the library, we went in the library and ran through the library screaming and shouting and panicked everybody in the library, but it drew attention to the cause, and we got lots of newspaper coverage as well, and media coverage. And I remember that after I'd graduated from art school, I was in the Women's Library. Glasgow Women's Library set up, its original premises were just around the corner from the art school. And I was in there, and I happened to be there when somebody came in and said, look at this, our group want to apply for funding to Strathclyde Regional Council. We've filled in the form, and it says here, you have to sign that in filling in the form, you accept that you are not contravening Section 28 of or 2A as it would be here, of the Local Government Act, and so on. So she said, we can't fill this in. So that was, an example of Section 28 in action. What it was decided to do was to protest outside the offices of Strathclyde Regional Council about this use of Section 28 in their funding applications. This was before unitary authorities replaced Strathclyde Regional Council in the local government reorganisation that would follow. So there was a big protest outside Strathclyde Regional Council, and we made lots of colourful banners and placards and so on. And we made it on a day that full council was meeting, and we could speak to the councillors about the effect that this was having. And what transpired from there was that we had meetings, really productive meetings with councillors and also senior people within local authorities to almost like set up a forum where we could work together to talk about how their policies at local government level could be more inclusive. For example, we did impact on policy over those next few years. By the end of the 90s, the Women's Library were commissioned to do a really big study on poverty and social exclusion of lesbians and gay men in Glasgow. And then we were commissioned to make a kind of handbook on best practice to avoid homophobia, to address homophobia in organisations. And that was adopted by some trade unions as a model of good practice as well in terms of that type of work. I feel lots of good came out of that, and that started out of activism. We can change things. We're sitting here at the Women's Library that has an archive and museum full of examples of how people have changed the law and hearts and minds and communities and the way that we all work together and understand each other as a society. I always think things will change because things have changed, and it is tough, I know. But I think things to bear in mind are the laws will change, but also don't forget about hearts and minds